Leveson. We're joined now by Conservative MPs David Davis and George Eustace, both Conservatives, both on opposite sides of the arguments. I think we'll find out. David Davis, the press has had about 4, maybe 5 major opportunities to clean up its act since the end of the Second World War and has demonstrably failed on each occasion. Why would it be any different this time?
And many before that too. But I think the best guide on this is Lord Judge, the judge who actually appointed, or at least recommended, Leveson, who said, you know, on the same day, the press will do scandalously difficult things or scandalously unpleasant things on the one hand, on the other, at the same time, will expose scandals and expose misdemeanours in public life because it's free. And he argues very firmly against statutory press regulation because it will be worse than what we currently have.
But that wasn't the question I asked you. I asked you, why do you think, after so many failed attempts before, after basically becoming an alcoholic in the Last Chance Saloon, why will it be any different this time?
I think what's different this time is actually I think the press recognises some of the things they've done very badly wrong. I mean,
they said that last time.
Well, I think this is a little clearer, and the various cases have actually shocked quite a lot of people, and it will be put right. I'm reasonably sure that Lord Hunt's proposal, I think it's got to be tweaked a bit, but Lord Hunt's proposal would actually work.
Are you comfortable with our newspapers in the 21st century effectively needing a state licence to publish?
It wouldn't be a state licence. I think, you know, the point is that as Conservatives, we are very reluctant regulators, and I include myself in that. However, we also believe in accountability, and I think what we want is a free but accountable press. And the age of them holding everyone else to account but having no accountability themselves, I think, is over. And I think there's a lot of alarmism about this. You know, we're talking here about quite simple measures you might introduce in statute to try and give some stability and genuine independence to an industry regulator. I really don't think that means the end of free speech.
If someone starts a new newspaper tomorrow, unlikely maybe in this climate, but suppose they do, and says, I don't want to be part of this system of regulation that you're recommending, would they be allowed to publish?
Well, one of the proposals, and we're going to have to see what Lord Leveson says,
no,
there was a good proposal by Hugh Tomlinson, QC, who actually said that you could establish in statute a body that would be totally independent, that would create in law incentives for news organisations to want to join, such as exemptions from exemplary fines on defamation or on privacy, for instance. That would create very powerful incentives for newspapers.
So it is a state licence. You do as we want, and you'll get privileges.
No, but under the Hugh Tomlinson plan, it would be optional to be part of that. But those that decided not to join it would obviously be subject to exemplary fine. So that is a choice that they can make. Paul Dacre.
That's how it works in France, isn't it?
Yeah. But you have to. The failure of the system that Lord Hunt's got, very unstable. People could walk away from these contracts after 5 years. The courts have already said that these what they call contracts that require permanent supervision are not ones that they tend to enforce. The industry funding body would have the right of veto of the chairman, the right to sack the chairman. And it's very clear that these £1 million
next time a newspaper exposes the expenses of you and your colleagues, what privileges will be taken away by you then?
They would have a public interest defence that would have some credibility.
Really?
You know, yes, absolutely.
A lot of your colleagues wanted to shut the Telegraph down.
This is why the journalists are wrong to be considered.
I mean, two points on this. I mean, the first thing is, whatever we do, I mean, whether it's regulatory or non-regulatory, will not work perfectly. I mean, the nature of free press is it makes mistakes. It's vigorous, it's very often arrogant, and it makes mistakes.
Sometimes it can be malicious.
It can be malicious too. I agree.
Horrible.
I agree. I've been on the receiving end.
That's not a mistake. Yeah. That's intentional.
I know. But at some point in the future, we'll still have a problem. Whatever we do, what will happen, we'll come back, we'll have another regulation, which is why the thin end of the wedge argument works. And at the time we have the next tightening up of the regulation, there'll be more MPs and ministers upset with what's been done to them, so they will try and tighten it again and again. And we will end up with France. But France, I've dealt with French ministers. Look at the number of times we've had a European Justice Commissioner, for heaven's sake, who committed fraud in France but had been covered up. You couldn't do that here.
The principle that's being established here, or that would be if we get whatever Leveson recommends, and my own editor James Harding in the Times put it pretty well, is that when people feel that the press has done or said or reported something wrong, they will from now on feel that it's up to the world of politics to do something about it. And that would be a very, very retrograde
I don't think
step.
it's up to the world of politics, so broadcasters, you've got a Broadcasting Act. It doesn't stop you asking very searching questions. You still have to empty chair ministers on a weekly basis. This idea that it'd be politicians controlling this regulatory body is a nonsense.
The Broadcasting Act that allowed Savile? That allowed all that followed on from Savile?
It was a broadcaster. It was a broadcaster that exposed.
ITV did actually do it though in the end, didn't they?
Regulation.
Some of the best
regulation did not stop Lord McAlpin being wrongly accused.
Quite, and there's no. I don't pretend there's a perfect system here. What I'm saying is, it is a nonsense. It is a nonsense to claim that just that having a Broadcasting Act means that broadcasters do what politicians tell them, or that it has a chilling effect on investigative journalism. The best investigative journalism we've got in Britain is by the broadcasters. Who exposed the Winterbourne? Who exposed the Winterbourne View care home scandal? The BBC, Panorama. Who exposed Jimmy Savile? ITV.
More critically,
look at Watchdog. They expose rogue traders week in, week out.
More critically, who exposed the things that started this, all the phone hacking? It was The Guardian. It was a newspaper.
All right,
but many of the other newspapers had a conspiracy of silence.
Let me ask you this, David Davis. Do you agree with the Prime Minister that the criterion for the success of the outcome of Leveson isn't going to be whether the politicians like it, or Hugh Grant likes it, or the editors like it? It's going to be whether the people of the parents of Millie Dowler and the McCanns feel satisfied.
No, not alone. I'm afraid not alone. I mean,
really?
Obviously, we feel very sorry for them, and whatever we do has to provide redress, and ideally has to prevent this happening again. But that isn't the only thing in play here. We're talking about a free press, which is the underpinning of every other freedom we have. So it's got to meet more than one criterion. Clearly, it's got to
I understand, but let's just take the McCann case, because it's a really interesting one, because it wasn't like the law was criminal law was broken. Here are the McCanns who've lost their little kid in Portugal, and were in the most horrendous circumstances for any parents to be in. And within a couple of weeks, some of the British tabloids are effectively accusing the McCanns themselves of being the killers of their child. And it went on and on and on, and they could get no redress until they ended up in the cumbersome and expensive and time-consuming libel courts. Now, Leveson surely has to come up with something that deals with that egregious behaviour of newspapers.
But that's why I think, and one of the reasons I think, a non-statutory organisation will be much better at this, because it doesn't have to have the appeal structures and work ECHR compliant.
But not if people aren't part of it.
My concern.
Well, they have to be part of it.
My concern about a statutory body whose statutory obligation is to define the public interest is that it won't be long before newspapers will feel that they need to submit their proposals for making inquiries and their proposals for reports rather than simply make the report and then deal with complaints that there will be after it. After all, if there is this body that can tell you whether what you want to do is in the public interest, what can be the argument for not asking it before you publish?
Instead of wasting your time.
I think that's a ludicrous suggestion. Leveson's not going to recommend that. It is, because if you look at the way broadcasters currently assess the public interest, before, say, Watchdog put a hidden camera on somebody to expose a rogue trader, there's a process they go through to establish whether there's a prima facie case to justify that invasion of privacy. The newspapers don't do that. They just go on a fishing expedition. And the public interest is then about finding an excuse to print a story that they've got, not to justify the invasion of privacy they've made. You know, there are things we can do to improve the public interest, but no one's suggesting that someone's going to have to submit their stories for pre-approval. That is a nonsense.
The first thing we can do is actually enforce the law as we now have it. You know, and I remember you on the radio this morning saying, "Oh, that means kicking down doors and arresting journalists." No, it means actually when people deliver 2 bin loads of evidence to you, reading it and actually enforcing the law. It means not using the counter-terrorism police to enforce the law. It means doing it properly. It also means prime ministers and leaders of parties being a little bit more sensible about their relationships with these organisations, because that also makes it more difficult to enforce.
Can I just ask you one more question? Newspapers are allowed to do investigations because they have an axe to grind. There's something they want to do. They have an opinion, an attitude. There's something. It's their own axe they're grinding. Broadcasters aren't allowed to do that.
I'm not suggesting the same.
Are you saying, therefore, that and that is why it's much easier to regulate the broadcasters? They're not allowed to grind their axes. Are you saying that newspapers shouldn't be allowed to?
No, I'm not at all. I think they should be biased. They should be able to be as biased as they like. What I'm saying, though, is that they shouldn't be able to hack people's phones. they shouldn't be allowed to hack people. So no, I believe in freedom of speech. I'm not
No,
going to
but
defend that.
hacking's illegal. That's a matter for the law.
I know, but this is my point. It's wrong for us to say, let's just lock up a few journalists and then go back to business as usual. We cannot ignore the fact
nobody's
that
suggesting
we've got unaccountable power in newspapers. That has led to, that power has been abused, and actually it has led to a culture that has caused these crimes to be committed. And Parliament can't ignore that. It's got to deal with that culture.
Well, in just over an hour, we will know what the judge has in store for our press. We'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Now, the Leveson